Chernobyl is the best piece of media I've consumed so far in 2019. Not that I've particularly been fed a considerable amount of competition, but this series really surprised me. Like most people, I just saw the trailers every week before Game of Thrones and the footage intrigued me, but I wasn't actually sure if it would be good. Or not that I wasn't sure that it would be good, because HBO has a pretty safe guarantee of quality, but I didn't expect it to be this good. I didn't expect much more than a factual recount of an interesting historical tragedy, but what we got was an exploration of this event that, as a single image with its intricacies and complexities, serves to represent the flaws with perhaps a specific political system, but only because its message is universal. The biggest surprise then was to find out who actually made the thing. Craig Mazin, who wrote the entirety of Chernobyl, if you don't already know, is the mastermind behind the Hangover sequels, Superhero Movie, Scary Movie 3 and 4, Identity Thief, The Huntsman, and a few other gems. Now, I'm not gonna say much more about these movies than they have an audience and are not exactly my cup of tea, but for him to turn around and create this detailed political and historical commentary seems to be nothing short of a miracle. But looking at his history, you can begin to understand how he came to write something like this. For starters, he didn't go to school for screenwriting. He got a psych degree from Princeton, where none other than Ted Cruz was his freshman roommate. It seems a lot of Mazin's political views are fueled by his connection to Cruz, as he's been very vocal about on Twitter for years. Now, I'm not sure entirely what led him from a psych degree to screenwriting, but somewhere along the way it happened, and he's since published his screenwriting ideas on his blog, The Artful Writer, and a podcast, Script Notes, that he does with John August, who's done a lot of work for Tim Burton, and admittedly the live-action Aladdin, which I probably won't get around to seeing anytime soon. These guys are an interesting case for the difference between knowing the theory and implementing the theory, but regardless of the quality of anything they've written, Chernobyl is nothing short of proof that the potential is always there as long as you know your stuff. Mazin reportedly came to write Chernobyl with no specific intent on writing this story before researching, but as he happened to read about it and learn more and more, he gained a connection to the story and saw an opportunity to create a meaningful portrait of this real-world disaster. So he did copious research, reading books of primary accounts of those who were there, those who weren't there but were still impacted by it. He listened to tapes, he watched documentaries, he met with physicists, he met with people who just lived in Soviet Ukraine and knew how someone who lived there would act. And most of the discourse regarding the series that I've seen has had more to do with the historical accuracy of the thing than anything. And while that's a valid thing to praise because of the painstaking detail that went into this recreation, I think that's more of a secondary pro because artistic liberties are taken in this series. For one, the series is entirely in English, with classically trained English actors, except for Stellan Skarsgård, who's Swedish. And when a story that rightfully attracts a large audience of people who are anal about historical accuracy is presented in a different language than the actual language that was spoken, this can be upsetting. But when you look at something like Chernobyl, or Schindler's List, or any other movie that does this, you have to approach it like an English translation of a book. And don't come at me saying subtitles are like an English translation of a book, because translation subtitles are the equivalent of translation footnotes. These movies are made for an English-speaking audience, and the fact that these are English-speaking actors doesn't detract from the authenticity of the story being told. If the series were in Russian, there would still be an impenetrable wall of fiction. These would still undeniably be actors acting out these events. The language they're speaking doesn't make much of a difference. The only thing that could make a Russian spoken portrayal more authentic would be Russian-specific phrases, and scrutinizing the language that much can begin to lose sight of what's actually important about the story. The other notable artistic liberty that actually caught me quite by surprise was the revelation that the character Ulana Khomyuk was actually created by Mazin to represent the multitude of scientists that helped Valery Legasov throughout the whole event. Now, I think it's safe to say that people who dislike this show are in the minority, but I did see a negative review that tried to allege a hypocrisy in the show for being anti-lying but lying about this character existing. But the show never lies. It gives full disclosure that she's simply a representation, and the reason it does so after the fact is A, because that's the first chance it gets to explicitly tell us meta information, and B, we're supposed to experience the story as a story first and foremost. Because this is virtually a 5-hour film that's heavily event and explanation focused, Mazin had to figure out how to best emotionally invest us in so heavily didactic a story, and if we were cycling through all these minor characters with minimal development, the show runs the risk of losing us in a web of characters it doesn't have time to establish like something like Game of Thrones would. And because they would have to disperse Legasov's time among all these characters evenly, we wouldn't get any sense of emotional attachment or bond. By doing this and revealing it to us at the end, we can then take the ethos of this relationship and apply it to our real-world understanding of his relationships with all the real-world scientists. And this isn't a new practice. I'd think back to like Raging Bull, which combines Jake LaMotta's manager and brother, who were different people in real life and in the first draft, into the same character. Certainly worth noting that these two big decisions have both been seen in Scorsese's work. And I think this is necessary because while this is certainly a dialogue-heavy work, it's not like a Sorkin film where the dialogue has enough energy to propel us from character to character. There are only a few characters and then a few more figures, but in an almost Dunkirk-esque way, this film is more about the event itself than anything. That said, it does manage to make Legasov and Boris Sherbina compelling characters, as well as Komyuk and even Ludmila Ignatenko, for other reasons, which I on one hand see as going above and beyond the Call of Duty, but on the other hand see as simply giving us a point of view character to properly immerse us in the story. What's interesting about the structure as an episodic series is that I do see the bookend episodes as a prologue and an epilogue, the middle three serving as the meat of the damage control. The whole show is consistently full of disgusting, disturbing, terrifying images and events that keep one intrigued in the same way an action film might. A lot of this is simply due to the factual events themselves being interesting to learn about, and the accurate equipment and costumes and other mise-en-scène of the setting being aesthetically interesting stuff that's often aestheticized in pop culture anyway. And the prologue sort of serves as the action-packed hook to rope in fans of more action-packed stories. That said, Chernobyl is not an action movie and is more about the political drama of the events, and the epilogue is essentially entirely about that, doing everything it can in its runtime to take what we've just watched and wrap it into a thematically and narratively satisfying bundle that completes character arcs and makes the statements that the events of the previous episodes serve to represent. So here we have the exciting, action-packed story we start with, and the dramatic political drama that we end with, these two coalescing somewhere in the middle into this show that more or less has something for everyone. It feels incredibly universal, and the pretty much universal praise it's getting will attest to that. What's interesting politically is that there are a lot of anti-Soviet or anti-communist or socialist remarks in the show, but the story isn't inherently anti-Soviet or anti-communist or socialist. It's anti-lying, it's anti-arrogance, it's anti-incompetence. Anything that may be criticized as a result of criticizing those three things is simply consequential. Here's the real kicker. I saw one review that claimed that the timing of this show was to criticize the Trump administration, and they were upset about it. Nowhere is there remotely a reference to Donald Trump in this show. And if you saw a message as simple as anti-lying, anti-arrogance, and anti-incompetence, and you made the connection that it's referring to him, then I don't know what to tell you. But that's the beauty of it. It's such a complex event with so many moving parts and ideologies at play, and the message is so simplistic that it takes on this universal meaning with such a clear, distinct image as a means of actualizing that. Craig Mazin has taken this infamous historical tragedy and realized it in an artistic yet politically respectful way. And real quick, I also have to mention Johan Renck, who's primarily a music video and TV director, who's directed an episode of The Walking Dead back when it was good, a few episodes of Breaking Bad, and some other shows. What he does tonally with this series, giving so much room to breathe while balancing that with these heavy, tense, intentionally breathless set pieces, works so beautifully and services the idea of blending the action with the political as a coherent whole. I'm really looking forward to the opportunities he'll get as a director after this. If I had to criticize anything about the show, I'd say that the music isn't exactly memorable, even though it does its job. It's just like a tried and true score that doesn't really push any creative boundaries but doesn't really need to. And what it lacks in music, it makes up in sound design. The terrifying sound of the Geiger counter seems to replace what would normally be like ascending violins or something, and it's way more effective. Aside from that, there is maybe some dialogue at the beginning that feels a little aware of the fact that there's an audience who may not be as smart as these characters, but I'm really reaching here. People have called this series visually dull, but even though the actual colors at the set of Chernobyl may not be the fucking Grand Budapest Hotel, the color grade is still high enough contrast for the colors to feel real and bold. And it's a grim event in a grim setting, so of course those will be the colors. And even so, the production team still manages to squeeze in a surprising amount of interesting color schemes when it's narratively appropriate. I don't know. I think this is probably the best piece of historical fiction that could have possibly been made from the events, and I commend everyone on board to the highest degree. All the actors, especially Jared Harris, and even notable actors in minor roles, the production design, and of course the script, which is entirely available online, and Mazin has been vocal that he wants people to read it and see all the influences on this film. Like Come and See, which had a lot of influence on the show's unhinged brutality. Again, this is a film that has something for everyone, and I'll be revisiting it very shortly. I've barely scratched the surface on what this film has to offer, and even so, I'm just gonna say it. It's a 10. Thank you for watching, and if you watched this whole thing and haven't watched the show, well, I'm a little disappointed in you, even if I'm glad for the AdSense. Just do me a favor and carve out 5 hours of your life to watch this thing. I really can't recommend it enough. All my links are in the description. You know the drill. Have a nice day, and thanks for watching.